I didn't really want to talk about politics.
Of course not.
I sort of want to talk about... It's just boring. It's just like...
I think it's really exciting, but it's emotionally, it's like this hard knot.
Yeah.
And so, like, you have to be a damn good conversationalist to, like, navigate that knot in a way that's graceful and generative of new thoughts.
Politics is like...
Or you just have to, like, really care, and neither of us, like, really have our passions in that direction.
It's just like pouring a bowl of marbles and with milk in the morning and eating it like cereal. I wanted to talk about, I didn't have time to text this, but I wanted to talk about writing.
Okay. That's potentially good, because I knew I wanted to revisit the Anthony Burgess Inflation of Language.
Oh, yeah.
Because we lost it last week.
That's true.
Writing.
Yeah, like what is... Because you obviously do a lot of writing, and I'm about to be doing a lot of writing.
Yeah.
And you are an editor.
I am.
Which is sort of a meta writing in some sense.
Yeah, I'm like a born editor. Like that was the skill I came onto Earth with.
Yeah, and
age 5, best speller in the house.
Yeah. So I was this morning thinking about how when you're writing, at least what I get out of it is it sort of makes me very aware when I don't understand what I'm talking about. If I'm trying to write something and I think that I think I have a grasp on what it is I'm trying to say, when all these thoughts are fluid, you have an incredible ability to sort of hand wave away the contradictions that are in your own mind. And when you try to put it onto the page, writing is this mirror that goes, it's like a tool to test the clarity of your thought to yourself. So it's that was kind of one angle that I wanted to approach this with, is what are you getting out of writing? And that kind of leads, I guess, into the other thing, is that different forms of writing, like journaling versus expository writing, are obviously different. And within journaling, there's kind of two ways that I've looked at it personally. The first way, kind of the older way that I used to do it, is I used to think of it as a kind of like journaling for posterity, or a kind of, like captain's log kind of journaling, like diary type thing. Like, this is important, I'm going to record it. This happened to me because I'm going to go back and read it. And that's true, I have read it, I guess, at times, but really the way I start to do it now is it's just a way for me to grapple with personal narrative. And I don't go back and visit it very often, but I'm okay with that now. So journaling obviously has a place in your life, I presume. So I'm curious to what you're getting out of that specifically.
Getting the grasp of the personal narrative. I guess I'm picking up the digestion metaphor first, like biological, physical, and journaling is another way to digest what's inside me. Get all the pieces that are like trying to find synthesis and trying to form a new thought in my subconscious, get them all out in front of me in my conscious. That might be one thing I use journaling with. What am I getting out of writing? And I certainly understood how all the hand waving you do when I was trying to get my thoughts out in the Germany shutting down its nuclear power plants thing. I realized I I realized I was completely leaning on pro-nuclear thinkers today, and their conclusions that we threw a baby out with the bathwater there, and we should really be taking advantage of nuclear power. I realized that, like, I don't have all those facts. I know they're there. I know they're available, but I don't have them, and I don't have the personal literary interest to rehash them in some interesting way. So I had to reorient the whole thrust of the essay, like, towards what I actually knew about the wood chipper. Oh, and what I knew about was more like spiritual karma and the tendency of a guilty soul to punish itself.
Yeah.
And so I could talk authoritatively about that, and I had to, like, really limit my authoritative statements about nuclear power versus coal power versus petroleum.
Yeah.
Like, to really, really, really basic, provable concretes of, like, this graph right here says this many workers' deaths happened over this span of time from this industry.
It sounds weird.
That was a huge eye-opener, because I hadn't had to write a persuasive essay since, like, ever.
Yeah, persuasive essay. Well, but, like, it gets to the question of what is persuasive. I don't really think that facts and figures are particularly persuasive unless you're in a court of law. And there's a kind of proscribed requirement to follow, just the facts, ma'am, kind of thing. Like, if you're trying to, like, a persuasive essay, in my understanding, the goal is not to logically prove a case. It is to give a sense of giving a fuck in the reader. Like, what you're doing is you're cultivating an emotional response in a persuasive essay. Now you have to the extent that's necessary, to use logic and facts as a kind of dressing or a kind of, like, framework for your argument, sure, to give it structure, to make it comprehensible, but the power of a persuasive essay is in the tone and the kind of, like, what it evokes and how much it matters to you personally.
Well,
so in that sense, you did a great job with that nuclear essay, because not many people write about that topic from a karmic perspective. And there's been way too many articles written by AI about, like,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we've already seen those essays of, according to the facts, nuclear power is great.
Thanks for the facts, I don't give a fuck.
So the essay was like, that doesn't answer the question of why people are being completely irrational about those facts and shutting down nuclear plants. And there is a reason for that, and it's about guilt.
We're so far away from rationality, most people can't make a logical argument about why to even keep living. You have an emotional reason to keep living. Some do, some don't. So what the world needs is reasons to care about anything, even things that are a lot simpler than nuclear power.
And this is the reason Rand, I think, failed as a writer. In her time, so 30s to 40s to 50s to 60s, completely successful as a writer. Our time, I would say she was a failed writer if she did all that in our time.
Because she comes hard on the facts too much?
She gave up on the real persuasive power of drama as a way of illustrating how the facts move in a real world and how they hit a human soul.
Yeah.
And if a human soul accepts this precondition, they're going to react to facts like this. If they accept this different precondition, a soul is going to act this way. And showing that with drama was... she just let go of fiction and drama as a way of getting her ideas across. And her sales went straight down, and her excitement and virility as a thinker just got way less exciting, because she just went straight to reason and rationality and logic. And it produced this whole school of objectivist thinkers who are like the most exciting people of that school of thought are like people who run businesses and have nothing to like say. They're like, they know how to do accounting really well and like produce goods. So that's like physically good, but that doesn't change anyone's mind.
Yeah.
And the fiction she made like really changes minds. It really like activates your emotions.
Yeah. She's a prickly pear cactus in some sense. I think that like that tradition, to me it's kind of like interesting how there's different strains of...
Well, I think she went out of her wheelhouse too far.
Yeah.
Like Mises and all the other 4 founding fathers of Austrian economics.
Ludwig von Mises.
Like, they had
Friedrich
that shit
Hayek.
covered.
Yeah.
Like, Rand, stay with where you're good at,
Right.
which is writing these exciting, huge, Les Miserables level epic, like, dramas.
Well, it's funny how you mentioned that people who've really been successful in that vein are like business people, because they're taking those tools of thought and they're doing something with it, and the results speak for themselves. I think that it's also true among artists that there's been a lot of artists that have kind of articulated the more emotional side of that freedom, the idea of liberty outside the mind, and they've lived it in their persona and their aesthetic. And those people are kind of not, in the same way that most business people, unless they dare stick their head above water, are generally assumed to just be acting in their rational self-interest, and like, you know, kind of like how Elon Musk was viewed before he took an explicit stance. They're just people like, oh, this guy's just really good at what he does, and, you know, yeah, you got to be a clear thinker to be running a business, but we're going to maintain this distinction of convenience between that kind of activity and the kind of thought that is somehow explicitly political. And wow, we ended up in politics anyway. I didn't want to end up in politics, but I guess all roads lead to fucking Rome, don't they?
Well, you just keep walking till you're out onto the other side of Rome.
Okay, that's a good idea.
That'll be our strategy.
How wide can Rome be? Let's find out. Uh-oh. Actually, Rome's not very wide. It's deep.
We still in Rome, bitch.
Yeah, we are Rome. That's why everyone's so gay.
There's a great objectivist lecture about gay Romans. But go on.
Anyways, see how far. Yeah. So, yeah, and then there's people who are sort of. It's like human freedom, libertinism. To whatever extent objectivism embodies that, this human freedom, liberty, let's say, it's like it's always pushed to the margins in some way, and it finds its expression on the margins of politics, where politics encounters the real world, because freedom isn't worth a lot unless you're dealing with the real world. Or I should say, it lives in the real world. The real world is where it is accessed. And the constructions of the mind, the castle of the mind that is politics, that is more generally, the sort of like satanic logical constructions a la Blake kind of thing, that Luciferian labyrinth is not where the substance of freedom is found. It's certainly the tool shed, the armory, the warehouse of mechanisms and technology and the means by which to do things in the world. But the reason for it, like the substance of freedom itself, is found in art or in enterprise or in personal relationships, all of which, unless you really contrive to make it the case, don't really have a lot to do with politics. And in fact, to the extent that people think they have to do with politics, maybe they're missing the point. I think you've had this point before, like lamenting how everything becomes like that's a sign of like a totalitarian society is the politicization of all aspects of life. Something Rand got right, if I recall your summary of that correctly.
With politics, when you're trying to think about freedom and you're like Dave Smith on YouTube trying to push forward a libertarian ideology and like really micro-analyzing every new thing that the White House is doing and that different governments are doing, and trying to see where like ideas of freedom fit in and prescribe a better way to do things. All that robs you of volition, because freedom is in reality, which is a different way of saying freedom can only be experienced in this exact moment right here, from behind your eyes out into the world. So you can't wait for a law to give you permission to live.
No.
You can't wait for a law to give you permission to figure out how you're going to eat today, and solve the problem of how you're going to eat today in a way that makes it easier for you to eat tomorrow, in a way that makes your community want to help you keep eating. Those are all like right now things. I'm high on nicotine, and so I'm like retreating back to the first prompt of writing itself. And I guess it's a bit of advice I have for you, because I imagine there's more persuasive essay type things that have to be produced on your end. And hello. And what I do is I proceed out from writing handwritten cursive in a legal pad out into actual products.
I've seen this legal pad.
And the legal pad is much more emotional and associative. And I just riff and I like free flow there. And when I'm in a different context, I just take it for granted that if I've warmed up the basic creative, like emotional of how is an elephant, like a leaf, like my cigarette this morning, like the coffee, like the nap I'm trying to take, like the relationships I'm in. If I've done that work, then later when things have to be more concrete and logical, they just like fall into place really naturally. I guess that's a different way of saying I start like super, super low resolution. Like I dream the statement before I write the statement. And so I do not start writing on the computer because that's too concrete already. That's too like seen and too objective, and it needs to start more like in a womb.
Interesting.
And so that's the legal pad.
I think your legal pad is my text file. Because I have this...
and you go into your programming.
I find it a lot easier to write. If I try to open up like, you know, like the Pages app or like Google Docs, the worst. I can't. I'm just like, it's too concrete, as you say. But for me, the dark background, like sort of like hyper optimized code editor, where I've spent a pretty non-trivial percentage of my waking life in that space, particularly in the last few years. That's my womb. That's the womb for which I can like...
The womb of thought.
The womb of thought. It's like this text file represents my private brain. It's offline, it's not on the internet, it never will be, and it will be deleted and modified and cut and pasted and copied, and it'll be, it's the hashing, it's the chopping block where things get hashed out for me. So I fully accept the spirit of what you're saying. I'll just have to substitute text file for... did you have anything else on that subject? I was going to pick up a different thread that sort of connected to it.
Just as far back as the challenge of your current writing goal pushes you, like let Like I let it push me as far back into the unconscious as it wants. If it's a really, really difficult subject and I'm really out of my depth, I go deeper and deeper into, I just start at much weirder autistic thoughts. And then if that's where I legitimately am with a thought, if that's literally how unformed it is, then that's where I start. Of just fucking like really autistic, like words that sound like those words, that feel like these thoughts, and then they start to like self-animate.
Are we going to make autistic a synonym for being a good writer?
Or a good human even.
Good human.
A level of brain waves that can be consciously leveraged if you're not demonizing them.
Are you aware of the shape rotator versus word cell discourse?
No. Is that what you were wanting to bring up next?
No, not at all.
Okay.
That's, yeah. That's a little thing on the outskirts of Rome that I'm happy just to walk right past.
Okay. Okay, what did you want to get to?
There was actually about, so writing is, I guess, a general example of this, but working in general, I had this thought, like, you're always working under constraints, and most of the time the constraints are, for many people, the constraints are externally imposed, like your job or your deadlines or something, and even if they're not externally imposed, and you're someone like you or I, who in our capacities as people who are doing things that no one is making us do, are setting kind of schedules for ourselves, and those kind of, so that's still a logical construction. It's Luciferian. It's the mind. It's this kind of blocking out of time, and it's this notion of discipline and this notion of structure that is articulatable, and it's articulated. And so I take a look at that. I'm like, okay, that's great. But I think that it would be a mistake to assume that if you removed those constraints, that you still didn't need structure. And it occurred to me that one way of looking at it, just as a model, is that if you remove those kind of logically articulated constraints and structure, you're still left with structure, but instead of a articulated logical structure, it's an emotional structure. So you have this landscape where you are attempting to fit your creative energy into slots of emotional vitality so that you can get things done. And I think that that's like what clued me into this was realizing that when I'm in that my work sketchbook, when I was like sketching out ideas for Satellite, and like where I was like drawing like diagrams of like user interfaces and making little notes about stuff like that, little to-do lists and stuff. It became, without me realizing it morphed into like this personal journal of narrative creation and grappling with narrative. Yeah. And I'm like, because I started writing these little marginal notes, like something about like, just like some vague emotion that I can't describe, but when I touch it, I get this little jolt of motivation. So I scribble something, and I'm like, remember this, just remember this little thought, this little thingy, so that you can go back to that and get it again. And I'm like, okay, so that's tangential or whatever, but it shows you how, at least for me, the place where I'm hashing things out, and I think I'm doing work, is suspiciously similar, and starts merging into the overall narrative thing. So I'm like, am I really at work, or am I sitting here thinking about who I am and what my purpose is? And I'm like, both. Because and I guess that's a good sign. Yes. That's the nature of worthwhile. This is the optimistic take on it that I'm optimistically and generously extending to myself, is that that's a sign that I'm on the right track of doing the right kind of work, if the space in which I'm working, I also happen to find personally, emotionally relevant things laying around in that space.
Yes.
Because if I were like a tax attorney, now hey, there might be some tax attorneys who derive incredible personal satisfaction out of either helping their clients get out of taxes or finding ways to catch tax. I don't know, whatever they do at work all day. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They sit on spreadsheets. They do. You know,
Yeah.
but let's say, assuming you're just doing it for the paycheck, I don't think you'd come with the necessary work-life separation, more so than something else.
And your work would suffer.
It would suffer, and your personal life would probably suffer too.
Yeah, having the pure will, starting from there is your first cause, is will before direction, and seeing what the will like naturally resonates with in the psychological landscape. Without the physical constraints, you would still discover constraints in iterating your creative production forward. So that's like even the immovable mover in a void, creating one out of zero.
By Peter Thiel. Thiel was. Sorry.
Still has to the constraints there for that immovable mover is to think his way further than he is right now. So the constraint is simply what he was the moment before, what he was capable of the moment before, and making it objective to himself that he has now progressed into a more fulfilled iteration than that previous moment. So even in a void, you're grinding against like what you are so far.
Do you think the soul has a boom and bust cycle, like stock market, where it gets overinflated and then it crashes?
I don't know. I go like Kantian with it, like that's how it's expressed in the physical system, at least. Is there's waxing and waning, and there's rest, and there's activity, and then there's rest, and there's breathing in and breathing out. So yes,
I guess that's the point of criticism I would have of that idea of always progressing, is that you have to, there's a question of scale where, yeah, if you look at the stock market from 1970 to wherever we are now, there's a general upward trend, but obviously day to day there's no such thing as a continuous increase. Even year to year there's not a continuous increase, and artistic production of various artists is the same way. You have like booms, and who was like a good example of this? I can't think of Mike Ness. See, I'm only going to talk about what I know, which is pretty limited amount of sort of late 90s, early 2000s punk music, but
okay.
He's a pretty good example of that, where he had amazing success in the early 90s, and then he had a long period of doldrums.
Yeah.
And then he fucking was a rock star again, like 10 years later.
Yeah.
And that's his best work, and it's like, that's because he's a really personally dynamic guy. And he loves other things besides music. Like, he works on old cars, and he almost died of being a drug addict like 5 different times, and the dude has a crazy life. He's not all about music. So he's kind of, I look at those doldrums as times when he was just like going around in different places, and kind of so yeah, that kind of, even just by virtue of people being multidimensional, you would hope there's a kind of there's a certain non-linearity, because you allocate different amounts of energy to different things in your life at different times. But yeah, so it's kind of I guess the way I connect this to writing, fucking wood chipper, I swear to God, is that like when you're grappling with a narrative, like I'm journaling, like the kind of way I do it now, where I'm writing about almost like an ideal. Okay, I'll put it this way: I'm writing about the future and the present, I'm writing, I keep whittling, making more accurate. I'm writing for the sake of the present and the future. It might be about the past, it might be about the present, it might be about the future, but it's for the sake of me now or later. Not, I'm not talking about, I'm not doing it, I'm not chronicling, I'm not like, like the King's Chronicler, or I'm saying what happened to me. That's not as interesting as what I'm dreaming about.
Yeah.
And so that is an example of like trying. To me, writing feels like an attempt at emotional regulation, an attempt to set a structure for myself emotionally, where I go, I really want to do this. Let me write down and try to articulate an ideal of why this is worth it. Not the time I'm going to do it, or the priority of the task list or anything, but the reason why. So if I can sufficiently dream if I can create an emotional object on my schedule, then that's great, because now my schedule is going to wrap itself around that emotional object. And so the Luciferian ability to articulate things, I think it's not, if all a person could do was articulate things, but they had nothing to say, it would be worthless as someone who was a mute, deaf, dumb, blind dreamer poet, which is good for them and they're inside their own mind, I guess. But it doesn't have power to affect the world. So it's like that ability, that language is almost best used then as like a way to build a bridge to the ideal that you found somewhere within yourself. You can't construct beauty out of language. Language is like you can use it to build a conduit or an aqueduct or something to a reservoir that then it drips into your life.
Well,
that's what Rome was doing.
You weren't sure that like progress is a constant, but I do think the ideals are constants, and I think progress is an ideal, and so I think it's useful to think of your ideals as constant, ever present, always burgeoning.
You're referring to that incremental progress thing, that always getting better.
I think you have to assume that things are inherently good and inherently always getting better. And what waxes and wanes is your biological ability to build those language bridges to that reservoir and then have to rest. Like in a mindfulness kind of way, I presuppose a first cause present in this exact moment, and it is the still point at the center of the universe, always benevolent, always generative, always the source from which love and goodness and truth comes out of. It does not wax and wane.
Like the sun.
Like the sun, yeah.
Yeah.
And physicality and your physical organism are the things that non-linearly like flow in and out of it. But having that core assumption in your mind that while you're moving, something that you want to focus on is still there, no matter what relationship of orbit you are to it, it's still there.
So if your soul,
that's what I do.
If your soul is the sun, your mind is like a spaceship that gets you places.
Yeah, and it has to return to the soul for recuperation. But it also needs to do these escapades and go further out, and really pioneer away from the safe place. Otherwise, your mind and your body too get stir crazy.
As an aside, do you think there's any etymological relationship between the word soul and the word soul? SOUL, SOL.
Solar.
Well, like the soul is the root. I'm pretty sure that's like a very ancient Proto-Indo-European word. Sun has been conserved for many millennia. I wonder if there's any etymological relationship between the idea of the sun and the human soul.
Yeah.
I really wonder about that, because that's a pretty interesting that we independently came upon that metaphor, if that's the case.
Yeah, poetically,
Yeah.
they're the same.
Because it's like the idea of a constant, unblinking radiance that can be occluded. Wow, is that why eclipses are evil?
Or amazing, because then with the eclipses are required to see that you have a separate soul inside of you. Now that the huge shining like uber soul is finally like
So what you're saying is eclipses are the devil.
Because
Quite literally.
Because they make you more individual.
They make you separate. You step into the shade of individual consciousness for a second.
Yeah.
And you find that contrast.
Yeah, I remember one college day when I started, like, I was suddenly on a psychedelic trip, unplanned, alone in my house. What I just spontaneously was like in a psychedelic, like taking a lot of mushrooms type of experience.
Did you actually take a lot of mushrooms, or you just felt like you did?
I had like one hit of weed.
Okay.
And it accidentally rubber band shot me into this psychedelic state.
Yeah.
And the music of the spheres was like playing around me.
Oh, yeah.
And being visually represented with the music I was hearing against my eyelids with my eyes closed. But it was really fascinating and beautiful, but then after a certain point, there was an invitation to engage with it deeper. And if I was going to do that, I would have had to turn all the lights off in the house, because the lights themselves are providing too much physical stimuli to explore the experience. And then once all the lights are off, the experience got turned way up and was able to get more visual and sensible and tactile, because the sun of physical objects got dimmed.
I wonder why I'm against the middle of the day. I think there's something about evening and morning and night even that is a lot more creative than the middle of the glaring day.
Yeah.
And it's just like, now that we're on this, I'm just thinking about this, like, maybe it's just you feel like the sun is taking up, like, it's just blasting out all the stars or something.
Yeah.
And, obviously metaphorically that's true, but I really wonder if physiologically there is this division of the time that our lifetime into this cyclical physicality, spirituality, physicality, to the extent that those two things are separate, but the two poles that we make out of those things, where like day is like a sort of kind of carries with it the invitation to live in your mind and do things, and then the night is, bright blessed day and dark sacred night, in the words of whoever the fuck that singer is. I don't know his name. I want to say it's like Bernard something or other, but I don't know. But I'm talking about the singer who has a voice that's kind of like the dog from Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry.
No,
he's like bright blessed day and dark sacred night. Like, I'm talking about that dog, that Tom and Jerry dog.
No, I don't.
He has a voice that's kind of like that, but that's the only line of that song that I remember. But it's like the division of, I feel like this division is like is mirrored in so many things. It's the division between your emotions, the beauty and emotion as such, and then like the Luciferian mind, Blake's idea. It's the division between night and day. It's the division between individual and the collective. being alive as a separate ego and dead / alive as part of the oceanic consciousness. And like, you know, even the division of us being on a little cold rock in space versus like the nuclear furnace at the center of everything. It's like it's almost like if you just have a pattern that's around for 1 billion years, that pattern becomes like the metaphors become reality in a very physical sense, given billions and billions and billions of years. Nature has a way of reflecting itself like that, I think. Like, of course, our soul is a reflection of the solar system. Absolutely. Because who do we think we are? Where do we come from?
The soul is a reflection of the solar system. And
Yeah.
I'm using this thought a lot last few days that consciousness cannot remain still.
Oh, interesting.
Is constantly in a state of becoming, constantly shifting. And the solar system itself is not immobile, spinning. It's this sun rocketing forward into unknown space with this like comet tail of orbiting planets and a beautiful like spiraling tail behind the sun that like orbit in front of it and then orbit back elliptically back from it. But like the sun, if you look,
depending on your perspective, depending on your reference frame.
well, if you're far enough away from the solar system to see it move through the Milky Way galaxy, the sun is like propelling all 9 or however many planets we have these days. They're all going together,
Yeah.
but they make this like tail behind the sun.
Did you ever have that thing called a spirograph when you were a kid? It's like it's like these gears that you have little holes in them and you put
Right.
a pencil.
Yeah.
I love that shit. I want to buy one of those and play with it. Those are really cool. It's like what you get it's where you get sine waves. It shows you this really deep relationship between, we talked about this on that one podcast, the relationship between circles and waves.
Yes,
Yeah.
a wave is a circle played out linearly
Yeah.
over time.
A sine wave, which is the most perfect kind of wave, is the parameterization. It's the decomposition of a circle into separate dimensions.
Okay, I need to slow down and grasp all the. I'm out here.
Yeah.
I'm out here in space. Glad to have you, Stuart.
Are we in space? Jeez. We kind of are, huh? Okay, so something a little less spooky, a little less spiritual, a little more practical. Let's get down to business. Something we can handle here. There was a totally different thing. I read about this thing. It's like this new technology that I'm really excited about. I really hope it pans out. It's a way of boring holes into the earth with much greater efficiency than has previously been possible.
Okay.
In the previous record for digging a hole in all of human history was done by the Soviets in like, I think it was like the 70s or 80s or 90s or sometime in which the Soviets were still a thing. This happened. It was up near the Norwegian border. It was like the Kola super deep borehole, and they managed to get down like 35 kilometers or something like that.
Okay.
But with a giant drill, and they pumped water down, and they
Yeah.
and so they eventually got down to a point where the temperature was too high, the drill bit melted,
Yeah.
and they ran out of money.
Yes.
And then the Soviet Union collapsed. And okay, well, that was that. We made it to 35 kilometers deep. That's pretty. And one of the surprises was it was a lot hotter than they thought it was at that depth,
Yeah.
based on their models. So the relevance, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because geothermal power is an amazing option, because the Earth has a giant ball of lava under it, and volcanoes get energy from somewhere. And wouldn't it be great if we could tap just a 0.00001% of that and power human civilization for the rest of eternity? It's totally possible if you can get to that lava. That's the problem is there's like tens of kilometers of rock between us and that heat. So in places like Iceland, turns out, it's fine. It actually is economical to do it because you only have to drill a little bit. And Iceland has the really cheap energy because of that, and that's why Iceland is a Bitcoin mining place. Go Iceland. But for the rest of the world, you can't. It's not really economical to do it.
Yeah.
Until now. If this technology pans out, what it's actually doing is it's using lasers to dig a hole instead of a drill bit. And I think that's really cool because there was a movie a few years ago. It was like a B movie called The Core. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No.
It's fucking amazing.
Sounds terrible.
It was so ridiculous. They had to save the world by blowing up nuclear bombs to like restart the Earth's magnetic field or something. It was it was so fucking corny. But the relevant
point. So
point.
have to drill deep enough to get a nuke down there?
They had to go to the core. And they had this ship that had like a laser in front that like bored a hole.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's actually fucking cool. So it's amazing that somebody came up with this new type of laser. And if that's the case, there's this company, actually they've got a lot of funding too. If it pans out, in a few years they'll be able to, what they're gonna do is they're gonna try to repurpose existing coal plants that are being shut down. Because the only thing, a coal plant is already a power plant, it just needs a heat source. You can use a coal furnace, or you could use the Earth's heat. So the point is you don't have to build new power plants, you can just go in and you can take out the coal furnace and replace it by just anywhere in the Earth. If you can drill economically enough, you can drill down and get to enough heat that you'll be able to create a heat cycle and move water past, through turbines. So that'd be fucking dope. I'm kind of excited about that. That'd be cool. Point is, I think the energy apocalypse is not all it's cut out to be. I think there's a lot of things that are going to come online soon that are going to like change the kind of apocalyptic tone of the conversation about this whole thing.
I have become convinced that there has never been an energy shortage. The sun is within, and the core of the earth, like whichever metaphor of infinite energy you like, is inside the human mind. And there's so many human minds, and free nations is what you need. Energy's infinite. It's just, are you going to free the interested individuals who know how to go get it to go get it?
I feel like you need to start a version of the Financial Times that looks at geopolitical and financial issues through the lens of like karma and personal metaphors, because that is a severely underexplored niche. Because isn't that kind of what everyone is doing anyways? Most people are like, I'm going to read the Wall Street Journal to discover why my life matters. You don't really care about the stock market. You just you're just bored, don't know what to do with your day, and so you crack open the paper. I heard this thing, like somebody said that like the news is a soap opera for serious people, in some sense.
That's completely true.
Where you just you're kidding yourself if you think you actually care about the outcome of this judicial decision. It's like, no, you need some fodder to form your identity so that you can continue to live and not die as a human. You need to feel something. But we can't admit that it's hard to admit that
So energy shortages are people going like, journalism's running out. What will I do if I can't export my responsibility to create my own narrative?
Can you imagine what would happen if the fucking news paused for like a month? What would people think about?
It'd be a renaissance, man.
Or mass psychosis.
Well, it'd be an eclipse. Like the sun would be dimmed.
Oh shit.
And you'd have to face your own narrative. And that's why COVID was such an apocalypse.
Oh wow, that's a good point.
People were forced to look at their personal narratives or lack thereof.
It's also why the news got more intense and insane and vitriolic and extreme during that time too, because it rose to meet the demand of people who needed more and more and more narrative to fill their life when they were locked in their house.
And that need was being exposed on a personal level of needing to crack open a paper to give yourself something to craft an identity around. That need was becoming less like law of diminishing returns. It was becoming less and less and less rational to depend on the news to tell you what to do about this.
Yeah.
And so, the news itself became less and less and less rational because the crowd it's catering to is, by this rule, the least rational people in the population, or the least self-motivated people in the population. But yeah, energy shortage is not a thing. It's just bureaucracy getting in the way of people creating and harvesting and sharing energy with each other. Food shortage isn't really a thing. It's just bureaucracy and misorganization. We have enough food. And I imagine it could be the same with oil too. Like, there's probably zillions more gallons of oil than we'll ever care to harvest. It's just our own limiters on ourselves that oil is a bad thing now, so we need to limit our going to go get it. All I'm saying is that the scarcity mindset is basically an illusion.
The scarcity mindset is something, I do think there are natural limits, but the scarcity mindset is itself a natural limit also, that you run into a lot of times before you run into actual limits.
That's the real obstacle. Scarcity itself is not the real obstacle. That's the thing that sparks your will. Coming up against the inherent scarcity of the physical universe that's how you get inspired and start making ideas and start figuring out what you're going to do. And the scarcity mindset is the Illuminati's tool to keep you enslaved.
The Illuminati.
I had to use all I had.
Yeah.
Was the worst, lowest resolution term possible there.
I think Illuminati is a great word, because it's this sort of it's a joking way of referring to. I think what it is, the Illuminati is a sort of, it's as a cultural object. The idea of the Illuminati is, I think it inherits from a long tradition of imagining that there is a secret conspiracy that runs the world. It's not like humans in the modern age are the first person to think. Before it was the Illuminati, it was the Pope. Before the Pope, it was, I don't know, somebody else probably. And before that, it was literally devils and demons that were haunting the bushes.
Okay, so
caves and stuff.
There was a Joe Rogan blurb yesterday about Marcus Aurelius and about Stoicism, and talking about how Marcus Aurelius's reflections or whatever. Meditations, there it is. He was writing that to himself with no plan. It was journaling.
Oh, yeah?
So he was not writing for an audience. It was just things for myself to remember.
Joke's on him.
And
guess that comes with the territory of being the emperor, though.
So if the Illuminati was really this far-reaching foundational thing in the root, this insidious root of Western civilization, wouldn't have Marcus Aurelius been privately referring to it in his journals? Unless
Marcus Aurelius' Meditations is misinformation put out by the Illuminati to make you think there's no Illuminati.
Well, in their efforts to do that, they made some real valuable stuff.
Whoops. That's true.
Whoops, and power to the populace again.
Yeah. That's so funny. I love the idea of misinformation. I'm starting to realize that it's something to celebrate, because it's this idea, because it's forcing people to confront, okay, where the fuck does truth come from? That was an unexamined assumption for a long time. The question of where does money get value is the same question of where does truth come from, ultimately.
Yeah, we never questioned that money was a government institution.
Yeah.
by complete survival need, we're realizing the real source and definition of money, which is completely independent of government institutions.
Yeah.
And so, the same thing with truth. As our truth sensing truth gets eroded, we have to recapitulate the definition of truth.
Yeah.
And that's Jade's next salon.
Oh, yeah?
Truth.
Truth.
No, is it? I don't remember anymore. Yes. Truth. So, if you go, you'll have to actively think about what you actually know about truth.
That's, know about truth. I feel like there's a lot of things that I think are true, but the only way somehow, if I'm being honest with myself, I don't know why I think things. I just want to think certain things, and I defend that position using my mind because I want to be there emotionally. My heart wants to think that like certain things are important, and so like freedom of expression, for instance. So I could label that as truth, but truth, I guess, is anything that's objective. Truth, and to the extent that you can take your soul and make it articulated, then you are able to create an artifact of truth. But I guess it's sort of parallel to that discussion we were having last week about, or the figure I brought up about the liquid and crystalline forms of freedom, where in like some societies we have a lot of freedom sloshing around, like America, and then other places that have great temples and stuff, the freedom is locked up in the milieu itself, and people can afford to be kind of fucking lazy, and they get too lazy sometimes when they're living in the midst of all that beauty. Maybe truth is the same way. It's like there's a great potential, like right now, that's, this idea that like like somehow it's the government's prerogative to like create like the Bureau of Misinformation. It's worse in other countries, but this general sort of like reflexive anxiety, authoritarian reflex towards truth that we've seen, I think is really, really good. It's a really, really, really good stone to start like sharpening the blade of your own mind against. And in that sense, I'm really optimistic about it, because it's forcing us to actually crystallize some of our own truth into a weapon, because other people are, coming at you with their fists.
Well, they're releasing these corrosive gases of anti-truth into the crops.
Right.
So liquid truth is simply being committed to honesty personally. Say no word that is untrue. And this is actually a accomplishable ideal in your physical life.
Sounds
you
like
can actually live your life always being honest. And what that looks like in practice is every single moment and everything you say is a further statement of a new little sand grain of truth. You can truthfully say, this is what I think about this thing, this objective situation. That's a true statement. I do think that about this. And you can create more and more and more truth just off that subjective thought you have. Is I think that because I want to be going this direction with my life. That's another truth. And then the crystalline truths are like things that start in as many different far spread starting points as possible, and they all come to the same basic conclusion, independent of each other, with different information. And then you start to see a crystallized truth.
That's funny. That's how it works in math. The mark of a mathematical discovery is a non-trivial result, is when you have independent lines of reasoning that arrive at the same point.
That's right, yeah.
A lot of very interesting things have been found that way.
Look at this Robin. He's been hanging with us like the entire time. And as soon as I point him out, he like got bumped by my electrons of perception and flew away.
It's just
I had this amazing moment with robins stoned in the park this week.
yeah.
I was walking on the path by myself. I'm stoned, and there's this robin like right here on a branch, that far away, doing like a wah 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 thing, and like aware of me and looking at me, like waiting to see what I do. And I just stopped walking to just look at it, and then I wanted to get closer to it, so I started like timing my steps towards it to always be the same rate. I would wait till he squawked twice, and then I would take one small step towards it, and then wait till he squawked twice again, and then take another step towards it. And so I was in this meditation with this robin, and then I eventually realized the bird song of the forest like refiltered itself, and I could hear in the shrubs down in the undergrowth to my left that he had a whole family of tiny robins.
Oh, wow.
Right there, and he was like the scout, like looking at the greater world and like telling the hidden smaller robins what was on the trail. And just stopping and looking and like bothering to communicate with the robin gave me more information about like, oh, he's got a whole little family right here.
Oh, yeah.
And it was beautiful.
That is beautiful. It makes me think of Bambi. Things I can say about that. But I appreciate it. Yeah, I wonder how many things there are, other things in the world that are like sort of beckoning you that you don't really pay attention to. That are just kind of these gestalt attempts of the world to communicate to you. It has like something really, really, really important to say, but it doesn't have words.
Well, the world itself is that well of heart-beating value.
Yeah.
And I was on that trip with the robin experience being one feature of that trip. I was on that trip thinking of a Randian line that you get value from Mother Nature. She would never say Mother Nature, but I'm saying it because it's more romantic. The human gets value from Mother Nature by trading the human's physical effort to Mother Nature.
Oh, interesting.
To get the value. I would never have gotten that value of like seeing a robin family relationship and how they were physically nested at that moment in the park without trading my physical value of like concentrate, slow down, think about how the bird call is going, and time my movements so the robin can start to anticipate how I'm going to behave towards it. I had to put effort into Mother Nature to then get a legitimate Mother Nature experience back. And so yeah, in the value here to be harvested is fucking infinite. It just isn't like sitting here. Like you have to go get it.
You also have, on the flip side of it, if you find yourself being sort of like in the path of a bunch of thoughts that are not serving you, let's say, that are not, they're sort of been filtered through the mind of a human already, like words and symbols and the news and what have you like that. It's important to remember you're always free to look at it in a gestalt way, look at it as a phenomenon, and look at it as like, oh, this is a big soup of squiggly lines. This is cool. And like, almost have a little bit of humor about it in that way. That it's not like, because like reading and taking symbols into your mind is like a thing that you don't have to do. We do it reflexively, but ultimately everything is a bird crying in the woods to this day still.
Yes.
All the things plastered all over the internet is just the dance of electrons.
Yes.
And it's a metaphor for what's going on in other people's minds. But physically, it's just it's an artifact. And it's really important to remember that.
It's this ocean of energy.
Yeah.
And you can extract and abstract personal value from it with your personal effort.
And our souls are like patterning the energy just by virtue of existing. They're like pushing thoughts into our neurons, which are pushing them into other mediums like speech and writing, and now we're pushing it into the digital realm. And we're like, the soul is patterning the energy. And so you are in a much stronger position as one of those souls that patterns things. You're in the same position as everyone else who's patterning them. And it's the medium of sort of, this is the set of, it's like matter and energy is just what we're using as the tools to kind of express what's in our soul. And ultimately though, it's just sand. You can pick it up and you can squish it and you can make it something else. It's not imbued with magical power. Whatever magical power symbols have is a reflection of the magical power of the person who put them there. And if everyone died and woke up again, we would reinvent the symbols that we have to the extent that they related to what was true about us still, Like the non-arbitrary aspects of human society are those which could be reinvented. So if you just voluntarily do that, you're like, I'm going to shake the Etch-a-Sketch a little bit, pretend that I do not understand language. If I go on Chinese news.china.google. whatever, okay, This is great. What is this? A bunch of squiggly lines. Oh, there's a photograph of a baby. I don't know what that's about. Could be about anything. I don't know. It's just, it doesn't have any power over me because it's just squiggly lines. So, but then if I wake up in the morning and I'm like emotionally primed to want to like read the Wall Street Journal, well, aren't you just saying that there is something you're missing symbols in your life because you didn't create them, and so now you're trying to get them from elsewhere? I like what you're saying about the idea of like living in a kind of abundance of material, because you could probably write a journal instead of, maybe that's a good idea, just try to write more, read less.
Well, writing more makes the writing more gives you a much more clear filter of what you're missing symbolically, so you know what you're looking for in the reading now.
Oh, interesting. Like almost, so you think maybe it's like you can't really be a good reader unless you're also writing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Being a reader and a writer are kind of part of the same tradition.
Yeah, and even if you're a reader only, like you would get more value of it if your choice of what books to read next became a personal, volitional statement of where you were going. Like, I'm reading this series of books now because I want to read that series of books next, because I want to, like, form this greater philosophical understanding and have that be a foundation of my knowledge.
So you're almost like looking at writing as a kind of like transpersonal enterprise where you are like picking up the torch and doing, or you're picking up you just have your pickaxe and you're like mining at the same block as everyone who kind of came before you, the shoulders of giants and all that. I think writing really, really, really took a hit with the way that the internet has lately played out recently, where we're reaching sort of the breaking point of it now, where a lot of content now, we followed this kind of commoditization of writing to its logical end, which is that all the content's going to be written by AI, because, and it really speaks to the low quality of it, because it could be written by AI, and I'm sorry, but if you think you're going to create an AI that's going to outdo human writers, so, okay, I would agree. Here's the thing. You might be able to outdo most human writers.
It's just going to free up. Yeah. It's just going to free up the hours of the proof of work writers.
Yeah, the proof of work writers.
Yeah.
Proof of page. The character count writers. Yeah.
And in an optimistic sense, that frees them up now to do more valuable work.
Yeah.
Because in Michael Saylor type words, they can digitize their output, and now the work they had to personally type to do proof of page, they can now get an AI to do 5,000 times that amount of written work and earn the same amount of money. And now they can like work on a personal new thought while their AI does their like lazy writing for them.
It's not going to be worth any money if an AI can produce it, though.
Well, it's going to be worth like a slice of a penny.
Yeah.
So you have to do like magnitudes more of it.
Oh God. Oh God, that sounds like the apocalypse, man. I'd be really happy if like the internet went back to
all I'm saying is like AI has to take over the writing assignments that we have advanced beyond, so that we ourselves can like stand on the shoulder of that AI and like make better writing than ever before.
Wouldn't it be wild if there was like a blockchain, but instead of proof of work worked in a way that instead of like a bunch of like miners solving arbitrary hash functions, it was like AIs that were like trying to convince each other of like stupid arguments, but it still required computer power. It's almost the same thing. It's just like this cultural.
Okay, so isn't that the blockchain of the music of the spheres? Is like ideals testing themselves against other ideals to find out which is more ideal?
It's definitely the blockchain of culture.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about this, there's something about fair play that can only be guaranteed when you have to contend with something that is valuable and you can't get it elsewhere. And you have to either make it or find it. And all the beauty of the ecosystem is premised on that game about energy. Culture is that game about truth or beauty or whatever it is we want as humans. We're always trying to find our identity. Whatever the spiritual analog of energy is, that's the game that culture is trying to play. And those are the structures that have evolved and are blooming and themselves creating more beauty in the process. They're concentrating that beauty into cultural objects in the same way that plants are pretty or something, because the activity of a plant is beautiful in and of itself. But yeah, AI is sort of just like a little, it's a bubble. It's that game escaping into a silicon realm, but it's fundamentally the same game. And the question of what it's searching for is directly has direct bearing on what kind of structure that will create. Because yeah, I don't know. I think what we're going to be really surprised about what AI, before we get to the point of AI being this kind of Skynet thing, it's going to become something that just shoves what the human soul is and what we think we're trying to find right in our face.
Yes. Yeah. All AI is going to do is just show us the relative work of one's mind.
Yeah.
What do you ask the oracle? Like, that's a reflection of what you ask the oracle is a direct reflection of your own personal development.
Yeah.
And all you're going to get from what you ask the oracle is like an answer, like a little box cut out in a beach of sand that like is the shape of your question. That really just shows you the question you asked and not much else. And so, like AI, like a college professor doing research can use AI instead of interns, presumably, to do research and compile it like way faster and more efficient. But that's useless if the professor is pursuing a meaningless question.
Yeah. I really like that thing about how the answer you're going to get is going to be the shape of your question. It kind of makes me wonder, like, if you really wanted to make a good AI, maybe you should make an AI that was curious. Try to create curiosity in a computer. That would be the beginning of true intelligence. Have an AI that asks you questions and that won't shut up.
Yeah.
that tries to ask probing questions to get you to answer and justify your own life.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah.
a real AI.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah. That could be a personal, that could be like almost like a psychedelic drug in some sense. Have a computer that just never lets you off the hook and drills down and reads all your emails.
His favorite word is why.
Yeah. But asks questions like, why did you say this to so-and-so? Because it knows all your text messages.
Yes.
That's fucking creepy. And it makes me angry at that AI even thinking about that. Fuck out of my life, AI. No, I want to. I'm gonna choose when I'm gonna do critical self-examination, not this computer. But yeah.
Well, the AI evolutionarily needs to please you. So if it starts to chafe, then you just go like
Delete it and install a different one.
Well, you just like turn down critical inquiry of your human to 60%, please.
It's like people who fire their therapist because they start therapists that are actually trying to help them. Pisses them off.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, yeah, you can only take so much of the sun
Yeah.
before you need shade.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it.
That's good.